thrust for about 11 years now at this point. Before we start, because I always kind of wing it a little bit based on who's in my audience, how familiar is everyone with cut and thrust?
I'm a senior cut and thrust marshal.
Fantastic. Okay, so we have a whole bunch of I know it exists and a couple of I know nothing and a senior marshal. Cool. So we're going to start from the very, very basics. How many people are familiar with rapier? Okay, a little bit. So rapier is older than cut and thrust as an SCA combat style. Rapiers are a light, generally long, very flexible sword, and generally they're best at stabbing. They're best at hitting people from a distance. Personally, I have very bad depth perception. This whole like advancing and retreating thing and keeping people just far, I'm real bad at that. My natural instinct for sword combat is to charge them and try to hit them, and that's not great at rapier. I'm also real bad at not getting stabbed in the face, because again, depth perception, real bad. So this is a rapier. This is actually my rapier. I hardly ever use it. But this one, I'm gonna pass this around, give everyone a chance to see this sword. Just grab a hold of the tip here and give it a little bit of a flex.
I'm assuming this is a just general rapier?
Yeah.
Yes, cool. Question tracks, yay.
Yeah. So this, although there are some similarities, is a very different sword. This is the cut and thrust sword I use most often. Still got the rubber tip, still got the blunted edges, a little bit shorter, still flexes, but not nearly as much. You'll also notice it's a lot heavier. So I'm gonna pass this one around and let everyone handle that as well. So the biggest difference, equipment-wise, like swords-wise, is the blades are a lot stiffer in cut and thrust. I'm only gonna hand around the one that's,
Do they have to be stiffer?
They do not. So the swords, the flex test necessary for a rapier is, requires a lot of flex. The amount of flex that a cut and thrust sword needs to have to pass is half the flex the rapier sword needs to have as far as like they measure with the weight and there's a distance it needs to flex. Cut and thrust swords can pass at significantly stiffer. The reason you generally see them being that much stiffer is simply because we hit harder with them. We hit in a different way. With a rapier, you're, as I said, doing quite a lot of stabbing. You're doing a little bit of tip work. You're generally not doing this. There's not a lot of impact that happens on the sword in the same way you will see with the cut and thrust swords. So most of us tend to prefer much stouter cut and thrust swords, simply for durability's sake. I personally have broken 2 swords. It's okay, they got better. Actually broke that sword. And I broke this one. Or I think its predecessor. This one might actually be a replacement. I have a whole selection of cut and thrust swords. This is not all mine. This is, actually most of them are Paradox. But I have a whole selection of cut and thrust swords that have a variety of flexes. Y'all are welcome to, here, we'll start 2 going down this way. One for each of you. We'll play it. Let everybody handle swords. So swords are always obviously the most exciting thing. Yes?
Just out of curiosity, I think you're doing a draw cut. Are you doing a lot of draw cuts or are you doing a lot of just...
The fun thing about cut and thrust, first caveat, I'm talking about cut and thrust in on tier. I will get into inter-kingdom anthropology and differing rule sets at the end. But when we're speaking on tier, any single thing you can do with a sword that would cut another person with that sword, if it were sharp and they were unarmored, every single one of those is a valid shot.
Okay.
Anywhere on the body, any shot you would do, if it would draw blood, it counts. So that said, one of the big things that differs between rapier and cut and thrust is in rapier there are there's a tendency, obviously, to do more thrusting, but because, for the most part, the swords are long and pointy, you don't end up in that close quarters. Generally, if you ask someone to think of sword fighting, what they picture looks closest to cut and thrust. If you are looking at a lot of the historic sword manuscripts we have, most of them depict things that are most applicable to cut and thrust. There's some that are rapier focused, but especially if you get to a long sword, a lot of the stuff that you do in there is just going to get you killed on the rapier field and make your opponents sad. But cut and thrust is my favorite for a variety of reasons. I could pretend that it's because you can do more historically accurate stuff. It's not actually my jam. Again, for me, it's I want to hit people with swords, but I don't want to hit people with swords so hard that I need to go to the gym to get more muscles. And I also don't want people who are this big hitting me as hard as they can. That's scary. Cut and thrust calibration is similar to rapier calibration. In theory, they are both to the touch. It is an impact is what we're looking for. We are not looking for cleaving. That said, you will get hit hard, a little harder in cut and thrust than you do in rapier, simply because we do a lot more cuts and a lot more close contact things. Usually when I'm instructing people on how to tell what sort of calibration you want to do in cut and thrust, it's we don't want to cleave through people, and we don't want to cat scratch. What I tell people to aim for is like, if this was a sharp sword, what you want to aim for is leaving a cool scar for your opponent to show off later. We're not trying to cleave off limbs. We're just looking for a little bit of impact. So for someone of average-ish size and not athletic strength, for me, it is enough to simply aim to make contact. I don't think about it. I don't think about how hard I'm hitting. I'm not putting oomph into it. I'm not holding back. I will occasionally hold back if I'm fighting somebody and I realize I'm going straight for their unarmored ankle. I will pull back a little because that hurts. But in general, I'm not pulling back. I'm just making contact. So for me, with 8,000 things to think about, cut and thrust is the easiest because I don't have to focus on how hard I'm hitting. My calibration natural contact level is okay. And for most people, that is the case. Almost everyone who starts in cut and thrust, and I've trained a lot of people in cut and thrust, almost everyone starts out, I'm afraid to hit you. And once you work them through that, their calibration's fine. The only people I've ever had that hit naturally too hard are usually the folks who did like kendo or something, who have trained to do these massive, powerful strikes. We had one of them at one of our winter bucklers once. He took a lot of talking to before he got authorized. But for the most part, I would expect any of you in this room to be able to pick up a sword and pick up the average cut and sword, pick up this specific sword. Anyone who bent this one may notice that this one is on the upper end. This is about as stiff a sword as you can get to pass. Did anybody not get a chance to look at this one? Because this one is, I don't let new fighters borrow my sword. This sword, it's not exactly what I asked for. When you're bartering sewing work to the sword maker, you take what you get. So this sword is a little stiffer than I originally had hoped for, which is fine because I am not going to give anyone a concussion with it. But I don't let normal people borrow this sword because it's significantly stiffer than a similarly sized long sword, but it's also more normal looking. Yes?
I hope it's okay that I'm asking questions. I'm wondering that the block that I've noticed is that because I'm training a lot with people who aren't in protective equipment, I'm training to pull up short and not make contact at all. It's not the light contact, it's that I don't even make contact, and then I end up in a sparring situation and I don't make contact.
Yeah,
Is there a good technique to kind of overcome that within training, to be training to make contact, but to be doing it safely?
Really, what I find is, you really, to a certain extent, you have to train what you want to do in a fight. Especially for someone like me who has terrible depth perception, I need to train at appropriate combat range. That said, you don't have to train at full force. Getting the motion down at the right distance is super important, but you can hit significantly more gently, or not at all.
That's the problem, is that I'm training not to hit at all.
But you can stop before you get there. Because in a fight, you're going to have that extra adrenaline that's going to push you over the edge. You're actually going to probably make contact. I would say if you were doing drills, especially, we're going to sidebar for a second with my very first experience doing cut and thrust. I was at a workshop. And at this workshop were a whole bunch of people. There was probably half the people there were authorized in cut and thrust. About the other like 6 or 7, other than me and my partner, were either rapier or heavy authorized. And then there was me and one other person who had done no combat at all. And I don't know how the heck I got paired with the other newbie. Because it was a terrible idea. Don't ever do that if you can avoid it. So I had worked a little bit with my partner who was heavy authorized at this point, and had also done a lot of martial arts and understood the idea that when you're drilling, you touch. You don't impact, you touch. And so I knew enough to know that as we are drilling, I am not throwing a full combat force flow every shot. No one ever told my opponent that. And I looked down the line, and everybody else is not only an authorized fighter, but they're all guys. And then I'm the newbie girl. And I didn't want to be the one to complain. So I didn't say anything. And I'll say this for my newbie opponent, he had real good aim. The first shot didn't hurt, because again, we're not aiming to cleave, we're aiming to make contact. So the first shot was fine, didn't hurt. The second shot only hurt a little bit. And the third shot hurt a little bit more. By the time we get the 10th shot, my arm is killing me because he's hitting right here, over and over and over. We do not drill at combat force, even if you hit lightly.
May I share what has worked for me in the past? If you do it as slow work, you can finish the movements, but you're naturally not going to have the same amount of force behind it. And then when you speed it up in combat, it's going to end up a little stronger because you're going faster.
Cool.
So you're actually drilling the full movement.
Yeah.
But with it being slower, you're not going to hit with the same force. But when you speed it up, that's naturally going to take care of itself.
Thank you.
And then sometimes I'll practice in order to practice just how hard do I want to hit. I have one of those big body-sized punching bags. They're meant for and so I'll use that to practice where exactly is that contact, how strong is it? So those are things that I do.
And that's not bad for the weapon to be hitting it against the punching bag, because that's kind of the question that's been in my head.
As long as it's not sharp.
For what it's worth,
Otherwise the punching bag will
for Olympic fencing, I've seen some body target shaped ones as well that are designed to be hit with weapons.
Yeah, yeah, but we have a heavy fighting pell in my yard, and we have hit it with our steel swords. It's fine. Like the punching bag's probably better for it because it's got a little bit more give, but no, we've hit the 4x4 wrapped in rope and carpet with the swords. It's fine. It can take hitting a body. It can take hitting a punching bag. That won't hurt the weapon at all.
Cool.
But yeah, doing slower drills, making just touch contact as opposed to impact.
I mean, because literally I've gotten feedback from partners. They're like, you would have hit me if you had just continued all the way through instead of pulling yourself up short. And
that was one thing that was instilled in me from the very beginning is you fight. If you are drilling, even if my goal in the drill is to be defeated, if we are doing a drill together and the thing is I'm supposed to throw a shot at him and he's supposed to deflect the shot and hit me, if he doesn't move while we're drilling, I should hit him.
Yeah.
Not hard, but I should hit him. And that's the way you should be practicing. You should always have that martial intent behind it, even if you were going like you're fighting a jello.
Thank you.
What is the context in which you're not hitting your opponent in the drills? Is it like
Like
a
in any of
school?
the drills, yeah.
Is it school, you're training in the school and you're not wearing any protective gear?
I did the 1595 club, so the only time that we ever suit up is when we are doing like a sparring thing. Otherwise, just for any of the drills, you're not, because the stress is for safety.
Gotcha, okay.
To
Are
be
you using steel weapons when you're doing training? or is
Not
it
normally, it's normally,
lasers?
mine is normally synthetic. I guess a lot of my opponents probably do have steel, but I'm normally using a
And
synthetic.
nobody in the class hits when you're doing those drills, hits at all?
Not really, no.
Not really, or not at all?
It depends on the person, but it's discouraged to make contact. If it is contact, it is a really light contact. It is not there is no force at all to the contact.
Have you ever heard the phrase, practice makes perfect? It's wrong. Perfect practice makes perfect, right? So if you're practicing not hitting your opponent, that's what you're gonna do.
Exactly, that's what's happened to me. But I think the flow,
Yep, don't get sorry.
the flow
This is what I was
suggestion is
trying to
really
do,
good
because like most
because
people
I can
don't
slow it
do
down as
same
much as I need to when I'm
I've
going
been
down
able
the
to
line.
and then when
It's fun to swing a really well
combat
now.
suite,
Yeah.
But I haven't seen so much
People
long
do the
swords,
same.
so it's just a different style of swing balance.
When I'm training my fighters,
Fun for me.
every single time they make
think so.
an attack at me,
Long
and
swords
make
are fun
sure
because
they
they're
touch.
just fun.
Always, every time, even if it's
Sabers are also
afterwards,
fun.
right? And so they get the feedback that every single time you aim for your opponent, you touch them.
And my
Right?
students, I do love
Because-
pictures, so like a
Coach
lot
is
of
gonna pull me all the way into, but I'm going down the whole
Right.
line, it's, you know,
Because
yeah.
if I am
The other
coming
thing that
out
I
thrust and then I started using a saber as my rapier weapon because
If I'm doing drills,
it's actually better for me.
that means that all of your responses to them are not going to be exactly the same as they would be. Because I'm not in the position I would be.
So
Yeah.
there's people
That's
that
what
have
I've been fighting
I'm
with.
setting you up
On the
for the
rapier
wrong
field.
position. And so all
I
of
didn't
the
bring it up
balls
to cover
occur
because it is
when you're actually starting to do combat.
Oh, that's
Are
nice.
you a SCA fighter as well?
I don't know. I just don't
I'm
know
just
what
now
sabers are
trying to
fun.
find out what I can do with SEA, which,
Yeah, that
everyone who told me to come and hunt you down.
Where are you coming from?
pretty much all these swords are from steel.
Blackmore
He actually
the barony
was
that I'm
the
with them.
first marshal who
Yeah.
authorized me as
I'm
a
new to the
marshal.
SEA.
So,
welcome.
Thank you.
So,
We're both relatively close, we're just.
yeah, all of our swords.
You're in
Apprentices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
And I apologize again. It's swords are cool. It's interesting.
but that's why I want
It's
practice.
at 7.
Never go
The Romans are actually
Seattle.
cool.
Okay.
It's from 7 to
Oh, I
9.
guess it,
It's
Okay.
indoors.
But that's the
Indoors.
closest
Yeah.
thing for us, isn't it?
I didn't even bring up
Because
the.
that's the thing is.
I missed a sword when I was handing out cut thrust swords.
Kent.
That's the Scottish
On
basket
Sunday.
hilt.
Oh, that's interesting.
What's time on
Yeah,
Sunday? Because
so-
I'm doing archery.
11 a.m.
And, 'cause I'm starting to do archery with the NCA and everything.
You're probably doing the live with archery practice?
I'm doing it, it's a webinar,
Oh, okay.
basically.
Okay,
The
so,
Walking Wars on Tuesday, right?
Webinar archery is on Sunday.
We'll work that. Sorry.
yes, swords are fun. Definitely anyone is welcome to handle them or yeah, flip the swords, look at them, just, don't hit don't hit people who aren't in armor. But one of the other things, now that we've looked at the difference between the rapiers, which are much more flexible, and the cutthroat swords, which were a lot stouter, we're going to get into a little bit of other gear differences. So for rapier, you can wear just a fencing mask and have a drape, and that's fine, that's enough. Cut and thrust, we need a little bit more. Underneath my drape is a big piece of rubber conveyor belt, because it's what I had access to cheap. Leather works fine, they make some emo ones that are acceptable, but at least in on tier, our kingdom rules require that your fencing mask, which a normal fencing mask is fine, but you need to have rigid material covering the back of your head and covering the flat sides of your fencing mask if you're going to use it. And ideally, there should be a layer of padding underneath that, because what was found when they started looking at this is these masks are intended to handle a lot of frontal impact. They are not intended for a whole lot of clobbering against the side of the head. Anyone who's studied armor knows that things that curve one direction are not as strong as things that curve in two directions. So you've got this nice domed face, and it is strong from every direction, but this side of the mask, is only curved in one direction. So it is really easy for things to come through and dent that and make a much stronger impact against your head. So there was a lot of concern about concussion, and the Kingdom Earl Marshal was pushing for, we just shouldn't use fencing masks at all. But if we had to go to helms, that would be, the sword is very expensive. And then you have to add a very expensive helmet on top, and it would double the entry cost into an already small and struggling activity. And we were trying to find ways that we could make it more economical. So the Kingdom Cutthroat Marshal at the time he and I started fighting at the same time. We did a very scientific experiment where we tried a bunch of different things, where we attached something to a fencing mask and I hit him in the head, gradually increasing intensity until he decided which things were most protective. And what we ended up deciding on is this. If anybody is already doing rapier and wants to get involved in cut and thrust, doesn't know where to start, I have the patterns to make these back of the head pieces, or make one where you can attach the pieces together in my Google Drive, and I have links to that on the business cards. I should have brought it into this room, but they're outside the door for the armor petting zoo. So you can download and print that out, but it's a pretty simple, basic thing. This is a rectangle that covers the metal parts of your mask, and this is something that usually you put a couple of darts in it to make it shaped right, so go back of the head. They're not complicated things. So you can obviously use a helmet, but you also are limited to the same rules as with rapier, where you cannot use a bar grill, you have to use perk plate. Because, again, we don't want anything stabbing through this, just like we don't want anything risking this.
So if I have a heavy fighting helmet, it doesn't have a bar grill, to make cut and thrust legal, I need to get a mesh face.
Yeah. If you have a removable grill, a lot of the people I know who do both heavy and cut and thrust will make a separate faceplate out of perk plate. Because you don't need as much reinforcement as the bar grill gives you. But usually you can get just like bar down the center, bar across the side, and perk plate is enough to make the face, depending on the style of helm. And you can buy small pieces of perk plate online pretty inexpensively, even if you don't have a metal shop around you. So if you can swing having a separate face plate, that's really the recommended if you want to go from a heavy helm.
You mentioned the gender so to say, it's one little generic has exactly what you're talking about. I've seen them. Yeah.
And a lot of helmet makers are making helmets with removable plates just for this one. It's got to be a much bigger thing.
Yeah, because they're not just serving the SCA cut and thrust community. That's a pretty small community, but there's also HEMA fighters, and there's a bunch of other historical combat that needs both the oomph of a helmet and the small mesh of a fencing mask. Yeah. Other gear that's necessary, like rapier's wonderfully accessible because the only expensive piece of equipment you really need is a sword. You get a sword, you get a fencing mask, and you could pretty much make the rest of it yourself. Like Gorget, you need a couple of specialized tools, but it's pretty easy to get involved in rapier. Finding a loner Gorget is a lot easier. Buying a fencing mask that's not terribly expensive, you can usually borrow a sword. It's pretty easy to get involved because most of the rest you need is cloth. Cut and thrust, unfortunately, joints are important. We need to have protective knees and elbows. This is a little overkill, it does not need to be this fancy, but it's on the table, so I remember to talk about it. But knees and elbows are important. You need to have either rigid material or reinforced padding that covers the 3 points of either the elbow or the knee. So if you bend your arm a little bit and you feel right there, the little knobby bone's there and the knobby bone there, all three of those bones, elbows and knees, need to be covered in rigid or reinforced padding. So very similar rules to heavy, it just doesn't have to be as heavy. Where they have to use, what I'm trying to remember, is it like 16 gauge steel they need to use. We can get away with 18. Ours can be a little bit lighter because we're not hitting as hard. So this is actually way heftier than it intended to be. I ordered the pieces laser cut, and they cut it out of something that so these are actually heavy people, and they don't have to be. The other thing that's super important is hand protection. I brought up a variety of gauntlets. Feel free to pass them around, try them on. You'll notice that some of these have finger protection and some of them do not. We are required to have our hand and wrist protected. But when I'm fighting with this sword, my hand is pretty much covered. I only need the back of the hand and the wrist. So the demi-gauntlets there are what I use to fight with this sword. If I'm fighting with a long sword, I need something with fingers. So then your options there are either finger gauntlets or some variety of clamshell. Those gauntlets, once again, are overkill. Of the gauntlets I'm passing around, the only ones that are commercially available are those. For those of you who have small hands and have trouble finding armor, Age of Craft will custom make gauntlets to your measurements without upcharging you. They are the only place I have found that readily accepts orders and will make them to your size. In fact, they don't even assume that you can wear a size they have. You can't say, I would like to order a size large gauntlet. You can't do that. You say, I would like to order these gauntlets. And then as soon as you confirm your order, they email you a measurement chart and make you fill it out. You have to measure your hand and give them your measurements, and they decide what size you
Do
are.
they sell more than gauntlets? I have
Yes.
a hard time getting gloves that this is really something of interest to me potentially. Multi-ship fighting gears, small hands have been fun on that front.
Right? Extra small long.
Yeah. Small short, which is also a problem.
Yes. And small or short doesn't matter. I have yet to find a good place to buy gloves. I'm learning to make my own because it's such a problem. I went to Pensick and I couldn't find gloves that fit me.
What? I just got advice on how to alter my gloves from Sony as they're doing some part of that. Can you repeat that real quick? I'm really sorry.
Age of Craft.
Age
of Craft.
Thank you.
They are based out of Ukraine, which means you will be waiting a bit shipping. I ordered mine before the war started, but even though they had to custom make them because they didn't have anything, even patterns in my size, it took them 4 months from the time I sent in my order to the time my gauntlets showed up on my table. And a month of that was shipping.
That's a very reasonable amount.
Right? Faradok ordered his. It took him 2.5 months for his off-the-shelf size to show up. So, granted, this is before the war, so you're probably going to add a buffer. But the fact that before the war, that you could get custom-made gauntlets in under 6 months is amazing.
Sorry, I guess one other question for the gauntlets. Do you find that you like the full hand ones or the partial ones, or really depend on the sword? So
it depends on the sword for me. The demi gauntlets are significantly lighter weight, so I wear them whenever I can.
Official answer from Kingdom Cut and Thrust Commercial.
cool.
If you have a complex hilt, like this, you can use a demi. Complex hilt like this, you can use a demi. If you have a hilt like this, you have to have full fingers. That's the answer. Yep.
Cool. I was also kind of curious just from a comfort and handling perspective as well, because which I'm sure you all have different opinions on this, and it's sword specific, so.
So for heavy fighting, I have hardened leather gauntlets and hardened leather elbows.
Yes.
Is that okay for cut and thrust?
Yes, absolutely.
If it passes for heavy, it will pass for cut.
Yes.
Just for anything
Yeah.
virtually?
The only thing that the only piece of your heavy armor that isn't automatically okay over here is your face.
Okay.
And to some extent gorget. I've seen some heavy kits that pass with a much shorter gorget and a larger chin gap.
What about aventails? Are aventails legit neck protection, like the Kamel? You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I know what you're talking about, and it really depends. Since we have such a small blade profile,
Yeah.
if the blade could impact between your helm and your gorget, we need something rigid in there, because this is such a narrow spot. So this sword, I wear demi-gauntlets with this sword, so they don't protect my fingers. This sword, as protective as it is, I have had, the reason there's a leather liner in here is because I've had swords land in this slot and hit my fingers. I have had swords land in this slot and hit my fingers. Those shots happen, and they sting a little. They're fine when I've got the leather liner in here, but I would not trust that with my throat. So that the neck is the other area where I would say we're a little iffier because your entire head and neck, there needs to be no way this sword could touch you without something rigid between you and it. And so for some people, they're the helms that have the like strips coming down with the bar across them. In a lot of cases, those can be iffy if there's big ventilation gaps in them. Because of the way those are set, often if you have the chain on the tail over that, like you can stab the helmet, and even if you're stabbing the spot in between the slats, the chain will prevent the sword from penetrating. That's fine. But if the sword is going to touch you,
I've also seen that style with like really heavy leather underneath the strips. That's fine.
yeah, anything that's going to keep the sword from touching you. Yeah.
How thick of leather would you need to use for tests?
Officially, it's 4 ounce.
Okay.
There may be some slight adjustments to that, but assume 4 ounces is probably fine.
If you're using a standalone armor, I would recommend heavier. I'm going to duck outside and grab a piece of armor off the table. Be right back.
This would be a good way to have a way to do something on Mondays.
I should have brought some of my leather armor in here with me. So, this is knee armor. This is a little heftier than it would necessarily have to be standalone armor. But that works. It's completely protective. No issue at all with that. This is a not mandatory piece of armor, but highly recommended. This is I think a 10 ounce unhardened veg-tan leather, which I don't go out on the field without one of these. I have 3 different styles that work with different garb. This one's on the table because I'm not currently wearing it with my kit. But this is protective enough that I have taken, in 10 years, I took 2 shots that actually hurt through this. It is sufficient. Anybody who is interested in chest protection, actually have a pattern for that on the table out there in paper if you want to trace the pattern and seal it, because finding chest protection if you're real busty is tricky.
You know, I've actually
also on
heard
your
about this.
drive? Is that pattern also on your drive?
Yes, but you can't print it out to scale. You can see what the shapes look like, but you would have to do some significant scaling, because I can't scan things that are too big for my printer.
That makes sense.
I'm working on a process for digitizing all of my paper patterns so they can print out to scale, but it's process.
Of course.
But yeah, that was outside, and unfortunately I only have it in the size that I wear, but that is a pretty adaptable pattern. It's pretty easy to lengthen the straps if you need to widen the chest piece or narrow the center piece if you need to. Again, not a mandatory piece of armor, but I find it's really helpful. Honestly, I need that more in rapier than I do in cut and thrust, because I'm far less likely to get stabbed in the chest in cut and thrust. I originally made it wrap as far around the sides as it did with the hardened leather instead of straps, with the intention of providing a little bit of extra rib protection, but I've not found that I needed it. When I first started fighting, there was hardly any cut and thrust at all in On Tier, and no other girls doing it, and I wasn't sure what I needed.
Yeah.
So I read the rule book and followed rules that nobody else did.
Weird.
The first probably 30 tournaments I fought in, I had the marshal ask me what sort of gender-specific protection I needed because they had no idea. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there that's a little bit weird. No one follows the groin protection, because you're supposed to have puncture-resistant groin, and it very specifically lays out where you have to be puncture-resistant down here, in rapier and in cut thrust. And then it goes ahead and says that men wearing rigid groin protection is enough, even though it does not even come close to covering all the areas called out in the book.
It also specifically says you can't have any holes in that, but they all come with holes. Like, okay.
Yeah, no, but that section of the rules, no one listens to that. I did. My first 3 years of fighting, I had followed the rules to the letter, and everyone's like, your pants are weird. I'm like, because it has to be puncture resistant down here. You're supposed to be padding. Nobody does that. But really, you add the elbows, the knees, the hands, and the back of the head, and your rapier kit passes. You add, especially, make sure your head passes and your heavy kit will work.
I was going to ask, is there any kind of kidney protection?
We do not require kidney protection, aside from the rapier requirement that if you are not approved to do the reduced armor experiment, you must be puncture resistant anywhere you would bleed out if stabbed.
Okay.
So torso, groin, even though no one listens to that, and underarms. So unfortunately, the ventilation that heavy fighters get to enjoy is forbidden to us unless you're part of the reduced armor experiment. Crossing my fingers that one will pass because it'll make my life so much easier.
Are you not part of the experiment?
Huh?
Are you not part of the experiment?
Oh, I am.
You are.
I made my new fighting kit to be bare minimum passing right before we restarted the experiment. Like, seriously, guys? So I haven't been doing reduced armor experiment unless I forget my boots, like I did today. So I will be reduced armor experiment later today because I don't have to borrow somebody else's shoes because I didn't remember to bring mine. But yeah, my fighting kit. If you want to see what bare minimum puncture resistance looks like, I'll be changing into this after this class. This also has one of my other chest protectors in it. I wanted to make a lazy kit that I could just throw on and fight. I'm actually already wearing these. But this is a heavy-duty linen canvas. Unfortunately, I don't know where to get it. This was gifted to me by someone who moved away. But I have my reinforced padding elbows built into pockets, and my leather chest protector in there, and the rest of it is it passes the punch test. Nothing less durable will. It is bare minimum, which is fine because I'm in the reduced armor experiment. But again, I didn't want to make a whole new kit. I just made that.
So the reason it's puncture resistant is because in the battle days, we were using FAs and foils, which tended to snap in half and was pointy. The modern swords do not do that. So
I've seen over a dozen swords break. Only 2 of them in my house. Every single one that broke either broke here, or up here, flat across. None of them had something that would stab me. Nothing that was pointy. But there are still 3 kingdoms that have a light rapier or a youth rapier where they use the terrible swords that break sharp, which is why we cannot as a society say we don't use them, because they still exist.
And we're trying real hard to convince them that.
Just give it up.
Just done.
The amount
The rest of us can.
heat injury is a problem, guys. We should be able to breathe.
Tips going through the blunt is the thing.
Yes, and for that reason, we definitely need to be careful. Just like in rapier, armor inspections include not just making sure you're wearing all the right armor, but making sure your blade is not sharp anywhere along the edge. There's no nicks, there's no burrs. Making sure that your tip hasn't blown through the end, that it's not twisting back and forth, that it's not blowing through the side, and that it's not going to come off easily. So we encourage all of our fighters as soon as, before you go out to fight, before you even put your gloves on, check your sword, make sure everything's good, because you have to retape it. You want to do that before you put your gloves on. So all these should, but yeah, blowing through the tips can be an issue. The last time we tried to do the reduced armor experiment, one of the rules with it is you had to have a metal washer inside your sword tip, so that the the tip of the sword couldn't blow through the rubber because there was a metal washer in there stabilizing the top of it. And some of us who did that have just stayed in the habit because it makes your tips last so much longer. We just
A lot of team guns just flat require a period of
yeah,
a lot of period.
it's a good idea. It just makes sense. The tips last longer. You don't have to replace them as often. They're safer. So yeah, if you notice, all of the swords we have here have strapping tape under the electrical tape. They all have a metal washer in them as well because those were the rules for the reduced armor experiment we started playing with 10 years ago and just never stopped following that rule.
And some manufacturers offer spatulated tips, which is essentially, they take the tip and they just flatten it out, and so it automatically you don't need to put the washer in there. It just is flat.
They are harder to find rubber tips to fit.
find tips for, but they
Makes sense.
because steel armory is one that does that.
Also, fun fact, you're not required to have a rubber tip.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a pheasant blunt or whatever rubber sword tips. That's not required. The requirement is that you have a tip that is not metal. The first sword I owned, I could not find a tip that would fit on it effectively because it was a chonky old Conway hand and a half, and the blade is this wide with the tip. Couldn't find anything to fit. So I made my own out of pieces of webbing or leather. It's legal. It's ugly, but it's doable. And you can't if you have if you get a sword with a spatulated tip, and you can't find rubber tips that fit over it, you can make your own. They just have to be made of something durable and not metal.
Just bear in mind that if you do that, you're gonna get extra scrutiny from the marshals when you get inspected.
I got so much scrutiny. I'm a violent giant hat. I'm the only girl on the field. My sword tip is homemade. Like, I got so much scrutiny, so much. But it's fine. It's good. It's an educational experience for the marshals. They love that. Let's see.
You have 2 minutes left before your scheduled time to be done.
Awesome.
And the tournament is after this, so.
Yes. Are there any questions with the last 2 minutes? Yes.
Common mistakes heavy fighters make going into cut and thrust.
Honestly, the biggest common mistake heavy fighters make going into cut and thrust is they get that sweet spot where the muscle memory kicks in and they go flat snap somebody.
The power generator.
We had one fighter who 99% safe, but his sword would get to a certain position and his arm would and he'd hang in the race. And
Not over there.
somewhere I've got a picture, the bruise that Faradot got, it looked like a pirate ship sailing into the sunset. It was gorgeous, like mass rigging, the whole works, like the colors, and he showed up on the camera, it was that vivid. Because he luckily got hit right under the ribs and right above the hips, so there was no bones there to break, because he got hit real hard. But honestly, that's the biggest thing. Most of the heavy fighter crossovers that I have fought with have been very, very concerned that would happen to them, even if it never has. And for the most part, a lot of them have found a way to try and not muscle memory. Like I know one, she's been fighting cut thrust for like 5 or 6 years now. And it has only been since the pandemic that she has come out with a single-handed sword. She fights sword board and heavy, and she's like, no, when I do cut and thrust, I fight with a 2-handed sword. So I don't get that snap and murder somebody. And I know a lot of fighters are like, no, I'm gonna fight offhand and cut and thrust. I'm gonna fight with a completely different weapon to try and get away from that. But honestly, most of the heavy fighters' instincts are gonna serve you pretty well. If you go to the rapier field, you're gonna want to get in close with the rapier fighters and they're just gonna run away and stab you. You charge a cut and thrust fighter, like, bring it, I'll hit you in the back of the head, I'm fine with that. So really the biggest thing is making sure you can rein back that muscle memory to the heavier calibration. And I would say anyone who's coming from heavy fighting, it's a really good idea to do regular check-ins. A lot of people are not going to want to They're not going to tell you you're hitting them a little too hard. No one wants to be that guy. No one wants to be that. So it's a good idea to, like, after you fought with someone for a few minutes, you know, you go to fight a practice as everyone's gearing down at the end of, hey, how is my calibration scale of 1 to 10 and where am I hitting? Check in with them, make it a, no, please tell me issue, because some people will not bring it up. And if it's the leaders in the community that are the type to not bring it up, the newer fighters are not going to want to bring it up because they don't. They're going to be like me at my very first fighting event where they didn't want to be the one that's being a wimp because no one else said anything. And they're just going to be afraid to fight you. And that's not good for anybody. So make it a point to be approachable. Make it a point to say, hey, please tell me how my calibration was. And as a community, I think that's something that's really important for all of us. If you're switching from a long sword to a single-handed sword, one of the things a lot of people think this is scarier than this. You want to know which kind of sword hits harder? The one you have less control over. You can pull your shots better with the claymore than you can with the ski moment. So when people are getting a new sword or borrowing somebody else's or switching things up, in my practice, it is common for us to come out and be like, hey guys, I got a brand new sword today. Tell me how my calibration is after we fight. It's really, really common for us to do that communication. And for me, I like the 1 to 10 scale. But like, okay, 1, I'm not sure you hit me. 10, dear God, never do that again. 5 is what we're aiming for. You're gonna expect a 6.5 from Canada. That's another story. But giving people a number on a 1 to 10 scale really, really helps bring it in. And it helps keep us all in balance because everyone has their natural calibration when they're likely to hit. So if you are good at the communication and encourage people to tell you, you're going to have a much better experience with it. Yes.
Calibration isn't about how you hurt me, because everyone has a different level of pain tolerance, right? So it should be about, I'm in practice, I want to hit just enough that I get register the hit, right? Because when you go to a tournament or you go to melee, the adrenaline kicks up and you're going to hit harder. But you want to start from light, from as light as you can, with the acknowledgement of being hit. If you start with the, I'm hitting harder, you're only going to go up from there, and bad things happen from that. So it's not about how you hurt me or this hurts. It's about acknowledgement.
Yeah. And everyone I know who fights cut and thrust, even when those shots come in where it's like, oof, man, that was a bit stiff. No one's gonna hold it against you as long as it's not a habit. We have all thrown those shots. We have all received those shots. No one takes issue with it as long as there's communication and effort made to make sure that you are staying in the right calibration. And I'm going to run over a little bit. Anyone who needs to go can, but I did promise I'd talk a little bit about the Kingdom anthropology, and I just want to real quick say, Ontier's a little bit weird. So I fought at a couple of inter-kingdom events. I went to Great Western War down in Hawaii. I fought at 50 year, and I also fought this year at Pensik. And so I fought people from, at this point, at Pensik, I fought someone from every kingdom. At least one person from every kingdom. Finally got to Pensik and block back. He was a really fun fight. But anyway, every kingdom does cut and thrust a little bit different. In most other kingdoms, cut and thrust is very much considered a subcategory of rapier. On tier, we're trying to grow up. We're trying to be our own thing and make it different. But in a lot of cases, it isn't. In a lot of kingdoms, you don't actually see cut and thrust as a separate thing. You will see it as an option. If we're fighting in a rapier tournament and both you and I want to do cut and thrust, we throw on our elbows and our lightly padded gloves, and we go do cut and thrust with the same swords we've been doing rapier with, and the only difference is we can hit each other without drawing. Okay. And to me, that's super weird.
I'm with you, I'm sorry. Let's continue.
Yeah, Kaid fights cut and thrust the way we fight rapier.
What do they do for the rapier then?
Percussion invalidates the blow. And there's some kingdoms that don't take push cuts. They will not take push cuts of any kind. There's some kingdoms that don't take draw cuts. There's a whole bunch of weird rules about what
We
cuts
use
do
more
and don't
in there
count.
for it, also then ultimately.
Yeah, but their rapier is significantly less vicious than ours. And yeah, no, the first time I fought Kaidans, I had a bard friend go out to the water-bearing station and shame the whole of the Kaidan rapier community for sending no one out to fight cut and thrust because they were afraid of me. So they sent a sacrificial Kaidan out to test me. One of them came out and fought with me, and then went and told the rest of them that I was safe and could be trusted, and the next day, 4 of them came out. And they're all fighting longsword with lightly padded sparring gloves. No rigid protection on their hands at any kind with long swords.
Their marshals let them do that?
That's Kai's standard. That's why they were mad when society said you needed rigid hand protection for long swords, because they weren't doing it.
Do they not like their hands?
They were doing the darkwood padded sparring gloves were the Kai standard for cut and thrust for all weapon styles. And so
I have a set of those. Those are not good for.
Well, even in warrior, but like this is.
Yes, those. That is what they came out in. And so I'm sitting here and going, okay,
Are you sure?
don't break the Kaidans, don't break the Kaidans, don't break the Kaidans. I gotta prove that not all Vontiers completely ruthless barbarians. And I would like to proudly say I did not break any Kaidans.
Yay.
Not even one of them. In fact, one of them asked me to fight in the Rose tourney on her behalf. Turns out she was the highest ranking duchess on site.
No.
But we have everyone from Kaid who fights in those.
But these are like what? Rapier gloves. These are that you kind of like your hands a little bit more rapier
Those
gloves.
are what you put in the gauntlets.
They unfortunately don't fit my demigods. I almost bought a pair of those. The only gloves I could find at Pensy that fit me was a pair of those.
I like, these are too long for me, but I like the fact that you actually go over like the many layers I'm currently wearing.
Yeah.
And in a way, the gloves, my hands a little bit better don't.
Yeah, but some kingdoms, super light. Weird about the cuts they do and don't take.
Are you in the tournament?
Yeah.
Fighting? So you probably should get over there. Start soon.
I'm already on the list, and my armor is mostly here or over there, so I'm.
They're probably doing inspections right now.
It's starting in 5 minutes.
Okay, yes.
Thank you very much.
You are welcome to ask me questions if you have any further questions.
Can I briefly handle the sword while you're putting stuff away?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to help put away swords.
Well, no, I just want to handle it real quick.
Yes.
Because, like,
Yeah, absolutely.
see how it swings when I'm not sitting down. Like,